Hi everyone, welcome back to what I'm going to call Ms. Bertazzoni's Reading Corner. This is the chair that I sit in when I practice reading for your class. And today we are going to read more of the Sideways Stories from Wayside School by Louis Sachar. Remember, when I hold up a picture, because I'm recording myself, pictures are going to be backwards. They're going to be a mirror image. So today we're going to read 3 stories, and the first of the 3 stories that we're going to read is the story about Myron. Okay, there is Myron. All right. Myron had big ears. He was elected class president. The children in Mrs. Jules's class expected him to be a good president. Other presidents were good speakers. Myron was even better. He was a good listener. But he had a problem. He didn't know what a class president was supposed to do. So he asked, "What am I supposed to do?" "It's a difficult job," said Mrs. Jules, "but you can do it. You must turn the lights on every morning and turn them off at the end of the day." "What?" asked Myron. "As a class president, you must learn to listen," said Mrs. Jules. "I'll repeat myself only one more time. You must turn the lights on every morning." "I heard you the first time," said Myron. "It just doesn't sound like much of a job." "It certainly is," said Mrs. Jules. "Without light, I can't teach, and the children can't learn. Only you can give us that light. I think it is a very important job." "I guess so," said Myron. He wasn't convinced. "Here, let me show you how to work a light switch," said Mrs. Jules. "I already know how," said Myron. "I've been turning lights on and off all my life." "Very good," said Mrs. Jules. "You'll make a fine president." Myron wanted to be the best president ever, but it was such an easy job, he thought, that anybody could do it. When school let out that day, Myron stayed behind. He turned out the lights by flicking the switch down. "Excellent," said Mrs. Jules. On his way home, Myron heard a horrible noise. First there was a loud screeching, then a sharp squeal, a roaring engine, and then the very faint sound of a girl crying. Myron ran to see what had happened. Dana was bent over in the middle of the road. "What's the matter?" asked Myron. "My dog Pugsy was hit by a car," Dana cried. "Who did it?" asked Myron. "I don't know," Dana sobbed. "They sped away." "Well, that's not important," said Myron. "We've got to try to save Pugsy." Pugsy lay unconscious in the street. Myron carefully picked her up. He carried her 2 miles to the vet. Dana cried at his side. "Don't worry, Dana," said Myron. "She'll be all right." But he wasn't really so sure. He gave Pugsy to the vet, walked Dana home, then walked home himself. Dana was so upset that she forgot to thank him. Myron didn't mind. He thought that was what being class president was all about. The next morning, before he went to school, Myron went to Dana's house. Pugsy was there. She seemed all right. Dana petted her. Pugsy licked Dana's face. "See, Myron, she's all right," said Dana. "The vet said that you brought her in just in time." "Hi, Pugsy," said Myron. He petted her. Pugsy bit his hand. "I guess she doesn't know you," said Dana. "She was unconscious yesterday when you saved her life." Dana's mother put some medicine and a Band-Aid on Myron's hand. Then she drove the children to school. They were late. They ran up the stairs to Mrs. Jules's class. The room was completely dark. "It's about time you got here, Myron," said Mrs. Jules. "We have no light." "Why didn't somebody else just turn them on?" asked Myron. "Because you're class president," said Mrs. Jules. "Show Stephen how to work the lights. From now on, he will be class president." Myron showed Stephen how to turn on the lights. He flicked the switch up. At the end of the day, Myron showed Stephen how to turn the lights off. He flicked the switch down. After a week, Stephen finally caught on. He made a good president. The lights were on every morning. Myron, who was president for only a day, was the best president in the history of Wayside School. It was just that nobody knew. So the next story is actually about Marisha, and we've already read the story about Marisha. So now we're going to read about Paul. Now, if you look closely at this picture, you will see that Paul is pulling Leslie's pigtails. This is not something, let me see if I can get this better in focus. This is not something that you would want to be doing with one of your classmates. Just keep that in mind. All right, Paul. Paul had the best seat in Mrs. Jules's class. He sat in the back of the room. It was the seat that was the farthest away from Mrs. Jules. Mrs. Jules was teaching the class about fractions. She drew a picture of a pie on the blackboard. She cut the pie into 8 pieces. She explained that each piece was 1/8 of the pie. Paul never paid any attention. He didn't see the picture of the pie. He didn't see anything. Well, he did see one thing. Actually, he saw 2 things. He saw Leslie's 2 pigtails. Leslie sat in front of Paul. She had 2 long brown pigtails that reached all the way down to her waist. Paul saw those pigtails and a terrible urge came over him. He wanted to pull a pigtail. He wanted to wrap his fist around it, feel the hair between his fingers, and just yank. He thought it would also be fun to tie the pigtails together, or better yet, tie them to her chair. But most of all, he just wanted to pull one. Slowly, he reached for the one on the right. No, what am I doing, he thought. I'll only get into trouble. Paul had it made. He sat in the back of the room. He paid no attention to anyone, and nobody paid any attention to him. But if he pulled a pigtail, it would be all over. Leslie would tell on him, and he'd become the center of attention. He sighed and slowly withdrew his arms. But Paul couldn't ignore those pigtails. There they were, dangling right in front of him, just begging to be pulled. He could close his eyes, but he couldn't make the pigtails disappear. He could still smell them and hear them. He could almost taste them. Maybe just a little tuck, he thought. No, none. There they hung, easily within his reach. Well, let them just hang there, thought Paul. It would be foolish to pull one, no matter how tempting they were. None of the other children in the class pulled pigtails. Why should he? Of course, none of the other children sat behind Leslie either. It was just a simple matter of being able to think clearly. That was all. Paul thought it over and decided not to pull one. It was as simple as that. Suddenly, his arm shot forward. He grabbed Leslie's right pigtail and yanked. "Yeah!" screamed Leslie. Everybody looked at her. "Paul pulled my pigtail," she said. They all looked at Paul. I couldn't help it," said Paul. "You'd better learn to help it," said Mrs. Jules. She wrote Paul's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. Tell Leslie you're sorry. I'm sorry, Leslie, said Paul. Said Leslie. Paul felt horrible. Never again would he pull another pigtail. Except there was one problem. He still wasn't satisfied. He had pulled the right one, but that wasn't enough. He wanted to pull the left one, too. It was as if he heard a little voice coming from the pigtail saying, "Pull me, Paul, pull me." "I can't," Paul answered. "My name is already on the blackboard under the word discipline." "Big deal," said the pigtail. "Pull me." "No way," said Paul. "Never again." "Oh, come on, Paul. Just a little tug," urged the pigtail. "What harm could it do?" "Lots of harm," said Paul. "Leslie will scream and I'll get in trouble again." "That's not fair," whined the pigtail. "You pulled the right one. Now it's my turn." "I know," said Paul, "but I can't." "Sure you can," said the pigtail. "Just grab me and yank." "No," said Paul. "It's not right." "Sure it is, Paul," said the pigtail. "Pigtails are meant to be pulled. That's what we're here for." "Tell that to Leslie," said Paul. "Leslie won't mind," said the pigtail. "I promise." "I bet," said Paul, just like she didn't mind the last time. "You just didn't pull hard enough," said the pigtail. "Leslie likes us pulled real hard." "Really?" said Paul. "Cross my heart," said the pigtail. "The harder, the better." "Okay," said Paul. "But if you're lying—" "I promise," said the pigtail. Paul grabbed the left pigtail. It felt good in his hand. He pulled as hard as he could. "Yeah!" screamed Leslie. Mrs. Jules asked, "Paul, did you pull Leslie's pigtail again?" "No," said Paul. "I pulled the other one." All the children laughed. "Are you trying to be funny?" asked Mrs. Jules. "No," said Paul. "I was trying to be fair. I couldn't pull one and not the other." The children laughed again. "Pigtails are meant to be pulled," Paul concluded. Mrs. Jules put a check next to Paul's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. But at last Paul was satisfied. True, his name was on the blackboard with the check next to it, but it didn't really matter. All he had to do was stay out of trouble for the rest of the day, and his name would be erased. It's easy to stay out of trouble when you have the best seat in the class. In fact, Paul could do this every day. He could pull Leslie's pigtails twice and then stay out of trouble for the rest of the day. There was nothing Leslie could do about it. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Leslie screamed, "Yo!" Mrs. Jules circled Paul's name and sent him home early on the kindergarten bus. Nobody believed that he hadn't pulled Leslie's pigtail again. And our final story is about Jason. Jason appears to be stuck to his seat somehow or another. Let's find out what happened to him. Jason had a small face and a big mouth. He had the second biggest mouth in Mrs. Jules's class, and there were an awful lot of big mouths in that class. "Mrs. Jules," Jason called without raising his hand. "Joy is chewing gum in class." Joy had the biggest mouth in Mrs. Jules's class, and it was filled with gum. There was hardly even room for her tongue. "Joy, I'm ashamed of you," said Mrs. Jules. "I'm afraid I'll have to put your name up on the board." "That's okay, Mrs. Jules," Jason called. "I'll do it." Jason hopped out of his seat and wrote Joy's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. While it was up, Joy took the glob of gum out of her mouth and placed it on Jason's chair. Rondi and Allison giggled. Jason walked back from the blackboard to his desk and sat down. "Mrs. Jules," he called, "I'm stuck." Rondi and Allison giggled again. Mrs. Jules got angry. "Joy, you're going home on the kindergarten bus today." "Oh, good," said Todd. "I'll have some company." Todd went home on the kindergarten bus every day. He could never seem to make it to 12 o'clock without getting into trouble 3 times. His name wasn't even up on the blackboard yet, but he knew that by 12 o'clock it would be up, checked, and circled. "Mrs. Jules, what am I going to do? I'm stuck. I'm going to have to stay here the rest of my life," said Jason. "Joy, tell Jason you're sorry," said Mrs. Jules. "I'm sorry, Jason," said Joy. "Oh, that's okay, Joy," said Jason. "I don't mind." "Try to get up, Jason," said Mrs. Jules. Jason tried. "I can't, Mrs. Jules. I'm stuck." Mrs. Jules asked the 3 Erics to help. Eric Fry and Eric Ovens pulled Jason. Eric Bacon held the chair. "Stop!" cried Jason. "You'll rip my pants." Rondi and Allison giggled. "All right," said Mrs. Jules. "Let's try ice water. That should freeze the gum and make it less sticky. I'll go get some from Miss Mush." Miss Mush was the lunch teacher at Wayside School. She had the remarkable ability to undercook a dish and overcook it at the same time. Her specialty was a nice hot bowl of mud. She called it porridge. Jason looked at Rondi and Allison. "No, Mrs. Jules," he said. "Don't leave me. Besides, Miss Mush's ice water is probably warm." "Don't be silly, Jason," said Mrs. Jules. "I'm sure it will be at least as cold as her soups." Rondi and Allison leered at Jason. "No, Mrs. Jules, don't go," begged Jason. "I'll be right back, Jason," said Mrs. Jules. She went to Miss Mush for some ice water. As soon as Mrs. Jules stepped out the door, Rondi and Allison jumped up from their seats and started to tickle Jason. He laughed until his hair turned purple. The girls got back to their seats just as Mrs. Jules returned. Mrs. Jules carried a big bucket of ice water. "Oh, no, please don't, no," Jason pleaded. "We have no choice," said Mrs. Jules. She threw the water all over him. "Well," said Mrs. Jules, "try to get up." Jason was drenched. "I'm wet and I'm cold and I'm still stuck." "Oh, well, it didn't work," said Mrs. Jules. "At least we tried. Now I guess we'll have to cut off your pants." Rondi and Allison giggled. "No, Mrs. Jules, no," Jason screamed. "I don't mind being stuck here. I'm really very comfortable." "Don't be silly, Jason," said Mrs. Jules. "Don't cut off my pants," said Jason. "The 3 Erics can carry you to the bathroom," said Mrs. Jules. "I'll ask Louis to call your mother. She can bring you a new pair of pants." The 3 Erics took hold of Jason's chair and turned him upside down. "No, Mrs. Jules," said Jason. "Now I'll always have a place to sit down. I won't have to worry about finding a seat on the bus." The 3 Erics began to take him away. "Wait," said Joy. "Mrs. Jules, if I can get Jason unstuck, do I still have to go home on the kindergarten bus?" "All right," said Mrs. Jules. "If you can somehow get Jason free, you don't have to go home early." "Don't trust her, Mrs. Jules," said Jason. He was still hanging upside down. "I'll just kiss him," said Joy. "No!" Jason screamed. "Don't let her kiss me, Mrs. Jules. Throw water on me, tickle me, cut off my pants, hang me upside down from the ceiling. But don't let her kiss me." "I'll just kiss him on the nose," said Joy. "We've got nothing to lose, Jason," said Mrs. Jules. "Ooh, who would want to kiss Jason?" said Allison. Jason hung helplessly upside down. Joy stepped up and kissed him on the nose. Jason fell out of the chair and hit his head on the floor. Rondi and Allison giggled. "Darn," said Todd. "Now I'll have to go home alone again." Joy erased her name from the blackboard. Okay, that is it for today. Now, there's a couple of things that happened in this book that you would never, ever do in school. You don't kiss anybody, and you don't pull their pigtails. All right, have a great couple of days, and I'll be recording another couple of stories in a few days. Have a good one, and remember, keep washing your hands. Bye-bye.